The girl in the smoke of the city was silent except for the sound of crackling fire and distant metal groans as the broken buildings collapsed on themselves. The war had ended here, but the smell of death was still fresh in the air. Human Scout Mason stepped carefully through the wreckage, his boots crunching over burnt wires and blackened stone above him. The sky was orange with smoke, and ash drifted like snow. He had been sent to search for any remaining tech or survivors, but no one expected anyone to be alive. Radio crackled softly in his ear, reminding him to move fast. Extraction was in 20 minutes. Mason kept walking past the remains of what once was an alien market, now just twisted beams and melted glass. Then he heard it, a sound too soft to be a machine. It was a voice, weak and shaking. Policeman turned quickly, rifle raised, but saw nothing at first, only a pile of broken crates. Then movement, a hand rising from the ash. Small and trembling, he rushed forward and found her lying under the burned frame of a destroyed vendor stall. Her skin was pale violet, covered in soot, her silver eyes wide with fear, her body thin and bruised. She was an alien girl, maybe 17 or 18 in human age. Her clothes were torn, her lip was bleeding, and her voice cracked again as she whispered, "Please don't leave." Mason froze for a second. He had orders. No survivors were expected, no passengers allowed. He was to scan the area and return, nothing more. But he looked into her eyes and something shifted inside him. She wasn't just a body in the ruins, she was alive, afraid and begging. He knelt beside her and checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. She tried to sit up, but winced in pain. He gently stopped. "Harrier, hurt, stay still." She blinked up at him. "Are you human?" "Yes." "Will you kill Menathan? Take me with you, or leave me to die?" Harry Mason looked at the smoke surrounding them, at the sky growing darker, and at the broken bones of her wings. Yes, she had small folded wings, badly burned. He knew if he left her she wouldn't survive more than an hour, but if he took her, he'd be disobeying direct orders and risking everything. But he couldn't just walk away. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She was so light it felt like lifting air. Her head fell against his shoulder, and for a moment she sobbed softly, but said nothing more. As Mason moved quickly back to his ship, he avoided the patrol drones and cameras. He didn't want her seen, didn't want her taken. He reached the loading ramp and set her down just long enough to key in his ID. The ship hissed open, and he pulled her inside. They were in orbit and out of range. Mason activated the medical AI to treat her wounds. He made sure the door was locked, then sat beside her. As the machine worked, her breathing was shallow but calmer now. She opened her eyes slowly and stared at him. "We did you save me?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I couldn't leave you there." She tried to smile, but it looked painful. No one else stayed. Everyone ran. When the fire started, even the ones who called me sister looked at her then and saw more than injuries. He saw someone who had been betrayed by her own people, left behind like trash, someone who had stopped believing anyone would care. "What's your name?" He asked. Kareem. Mason nodded slowly, then her eyes closed again as the sedative took effect, and she fell into sleep. Mason leaned back in his chair, heart racing. He had lied to command and broken protocol, and if they found out, he'd be court-martialed. But when he looked at the girl sleeping peacefully for the first time, in who knew how long, he didn't feel regret. He felt something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this choice would lead to trouble, to danger, to questions he couldn't answer. But for now, he just listened to the hum of the ship and the soft breathing of the girl he had saved. For the first time since the war began, he didn't feel alone. She cried in her sleep. The ship drifted quietly through deep space, far from any patrol or skin range. Mason sat alone in the pilot's seat, watching the stars outside while the girl lay in the small med bay, her body wrapped in clean blankets, her wounds slowly healing, thanks to the ship's auto-med system. But it wasn't her body that concerned him. Most it was the sound she made when she slept. She cried, not loudly, not like a child, but soft and broken, like someone who didn't believe anyone could hear her. Every night since he brought her aboard, she trembled and whispered words in a language he didn't fully understand. Sometimes she called out a name, sometimes she just repeated one word again and again. "Please, please, please." Mason hadn't slept much either. He stayed near the door listening, unsure if he should wake her or just let her fight through it alone. On the third night, he sat beside her as she slept and gently reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her forehead. Her skin was warm, but she flinched even in sleep. As if expecting pain. What did they do to Yao? Didn't expect an answer. But suddenly her eyes opened wide, glowing faintly with light. She gasped and tried to sit up, looking around in panique. No, it's okay, it's me, Mason, you're safe. You're on my ship. She stared at him, breathing fast, then relaxed only slightly. When she recognized his face, had the dream again one where they leave you behind? She nodded slowly. Her voice was thin like paper torn at the edge. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire and hear them running, and then I'm alone, always alone. Mason offered her a cup of warm water, and she held it tightly, as if it would vanish if she let go. She drank slowly, then looked at him with tired silver eyes. Did you really take me aside and leaned back against the wall? Because I've seen too many bodies, too many broken people. I thought I stopped feeling anything a long time ago. Then you spoke, and it was like someone struck my heart with lightning. That's a strange reason, Mabe, but it's the truth. She was quiet for a while, then looked down at her hands. Her fingers were long and graceful, but marked with scars. One of them was fresh, a burn that didn't look like it came from battle. Woe did that? Mason asked gently. Kira hesitated, then spoke slowly. You was property to them, not a person. They called me rare, useful, valuable, but never alive. They used to test things on me like I was a machine. Mason felt his fists tighten, his jaw locked. He had seen cruelty in war, but this was something different. Not enemies in battle, but monsters hiding behind money and science. You're not their property anymore, he said firmly. Not while I'm breathing. She looked up at him then, and something in her face softened. Her expression wasn't fear anymore. It was disbelief mixed with a tiny spark of hope. Are you like this? Mason chuckled dryly. You mean why? Am I not a heartless soldier who followed orders and left you to despeak house? I've been left before too, and I remember what it felt like. Akira blinked and tilted her head. Woe left you me squad, he said after a pause. I was trapped during a collapse on Delta Base, called for help for 6 hours. No one came. I broke my leg trying to crawl out. Then some miner who wasn't even supposed to be in that zone pulled me out. He didn't ask my rank or name. He just said, you look like you didn't want to die. Alana Kyra didn't speak, but she reached out slowly and placed her hand on his. His skin was rough, hers soft, but the touch felt right, like two broken pieces finally fitting together. Thank you, Mason, not just for saving me, but for not treating me like I'm less. You're not less, Kyra. You're more than anyone ever gave you credit for. Stood then and looked toward the pilot console. Well, reach the next sector in a few hours. I need to figure out where to hide next and where to find Suppliesi can help, she said suddenly, her voice stronger. I know places, off-grid places, where their eyes can't reach. I wasn't always a prisoner. I used to run. Mason raised an eyebrow. You used to run from everyone, she said with a slight smile, but maybe not anymore. He smiled back and felt something shift again inside him. Not just sympathy, not just duty, but something warmer, something dangerous, something real. As she lay back down to rest this time, she didn't cry, and for the first time she whispered, not please, but thank you. And Mason sat near her door again, not as a guard, not as a soldier, but as someone who had made a promise. One he had no intention of breaking that now, not ever. Haunted by shadows, the stars looked peaceful from the viewport like distant candles in an endless sea. But peace was a lie. Mason knew that, especially now, because something had started chasing them. Something not human, something quiet and patient, like a shadow that smiled while holding a knife. Kyra sat in the co-pilot seat, her knees pulled close to her chest, her eyes staring at the display that showed the scanner's outer perimeter. It blinked softly, nothing on screen yet, but her body was tense, her wings slightly twitching like they could feel what the screen could not. They are close, she whispered. Edmison glanced over. You sir, I don't see them, I feel them. Hud didn't question her. Not anymore after what she'd told him, after what he'd seen, the burn marks on her skin, the scars shaped like cuffs, the nightmares that made her scream words in a language he couldn't understand until she begged in English. Please don't take me again. Ship's warning light flickered once, then stopped. False alarm, Mason said, but his voice lacked confidence. Akira shook her head. They don't trigger alarms. They're smarter than that. They move like whispers inside the space between things. They're not ships, they're seekers. Mason had heard of seekers once in a black file locked behind clearance levels above his pay grade. Stories about biologic hunters built in labs owned by corporations so secret even the government was afraid to ask questions. Seekers weren't made to capture, they were made to harass. Do they want you so bad? Mason asked. Kyra's eyes stayed on the stars. Because I carry what they thought they destroyed. She turned to him, slowly. Me kind is almost extinct. We lived in harmony with memory, we passed knowledge. Through blood, not books, it's all in me. Thousands of years of songs, codes, stories, and things they never wanted known again. Mason didn't speak for a long time. So they killed your people to erase the past, and now they want to dissect me to be sure it's gone forever. Tightened his grip on the controls, jaw clenching. They're not getting you. You can't protect me forever, maybe not, but I can make them bleed. The lights flickered again, this time longer. Mason's hand went to his weapon by instinct, even though it wouldn't help much against machines that didn't bleed. Power flux, Cairo whispered. They're getting closer. They're pulling on the energy around us. They drink signals, they ride static. Suddenly the console blinked red and an unknown signal broke through the silence. It wasn't words, it was a sound like glass shattering and someone breathing behind your neck. Even though you're alone, Mason muted it instantly. But Cairo winced, holding her head. They are calling me. They know I'm Hurricane. We jump. No, they're bending the route. Mason said, I can feel it. The stars look wrong. We can't plot an escape. Kira stood up and touched the ship wall, with her hand closing, her eyes slowly. There's one place I can take us they don't know about. It's deep, it's old, it's forgotten even by most of my kind, but they won't follow us there. He narrowed his eyes. What kind of place? A scar in space, she said softly. A place where light doesn't echo and sound can't breathe. Mason didn't understand, but he had stopped doubting her a long time ago. And put the coordinates. Eskia moved her fingers across the console, her hands shaking. The path she chose looked like it led into a dead zone, but the ship responded. A secret route was accepted, like it remembered something buried long ago. As the engines shifted direction, Mason glanced at Harry. You've been there before, haven't you? She nodded. One seats where I became a ghost. Lights dimmed as they moved into the dark. The stars outside started to fade, like someone pulled a curtain over them, and Mason felt something heavy settle in his chest, like the ship had entered the breath of something ancient. Kyra leaned against the wall, her body weak again from the strain. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, her voice trembling. I didn't want you to be hunted too. I thought maybe you'd drop me at the next port and leave me like the others. She looked at her and shook his head slowly. You don't leave people who cry in their sleep. She didn't speak, but her eyes glistened and her wings folded tightly around her shoulders, like a cloak of protection. Beneath them, far in the shadow, something moved, something large and alive, not in body but in purpose. The seekers had arrived too late, and they screamed through the static, but the ship had already vanished into the rift. And in that silence, Kyra looked at Mason and whispered, next time I won't run. And Mason whispered back, next time I won't let you. Asterisk the memory she hid. The rift was not black, it was not empty, it was not even quiet. It was something else altogether, like drifting inside a forgotten heartbeat, slow, heavy, and endless. The stars outside were gone, and the screens on Mason's ship showed nothing but static lines and deep colorless space. No sound, no echo, no direction, just them suspended like dust in an abandoned cathedral. Kira sat near the core chamber, cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing slow, her wings folded tightly around her back, her skin paler than before, as if the place drained more than light. Mason leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. She had barely spoken since they entered this place 3 hours ago, maybe more. It was hard to measure time. Here clocks didn't tick right, and he had to shut down the ship's engines to avoid being noticed by whatever might still live in the void. He took a slow breath and finally asked the question that had been eating him since the start. What exactly are you? Karash opened her eyes slowly, silver irises glowing faintly in the dark. I told you before, my people passed memory through blood, but that's only part of it. I wasn't just any girl in that city, Mason. I was made differently on purpose. Mason stepped closer. What do you mean? Madesh stood up slowly and placed a hand over her chest. Her voice was soft but steady now. I was designed, bread-shaped, by one of the last memory mothers, a matriarch who knew the end was coming. She wove thousands of voices inside me, knowledge, maps, weapons, languages, secrets that could destroy or save. But when the wars started, I was still a child, swallowed hard. You're like a living archive. Worse, she whispered. I'm a key and a door, both, and when I bleed, those who want the past awakened will come, and those who want it buried will come. To no one wants me alive for long. Mason looked at her, stunned. The people who hunted you, they know what's in you, only part of it. They know I can awaken the truth, but not how. Then why are you still alive? Because I haven't remembered everything yet. That made his blood run cold. So what happens when you? Dash looked at him, then truly looked at him, her eyes sad but certain, when I remember everything I won't be me anymore. I'll be them to the thousands who came. Before every voice, every pain, every war, every choice. It will all be inside. Mash shook his head slowly. No, you're still young at forever's forever. Because no matter what you carry or what wakes up inside you, I'll remind you who you are. He stepped closer, voice firm. I'm not leaving, and I'm not letting you drown in their memory. S smiled. Then a small sad smile, like she wanted to believe him, but couldn't fully hold on to something. I haven't told you, she said. I didn't just survive the fire because I was lucky. I survived because I killed someone close to me. To keep the secret, Mason stared, his voice quiet. Hoosh turned her back to him, unable to meet his eyes. My sister, she was older, stronger, smarter. She was chosen to be the keeper of the core, but when they came for us, she broke. She wanted to give them what they asked. I stopped her. I didn't mean to, but it happened so fast. Mason stepped closer again, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. She would have been proud of you. Kyra's voice cracked. No, she wouldn't. She begged me not to do it. She begged me to let them take me instead, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. You survived, he said. You made a choice, the only one you could, and if you didn't, we wouldn't be here right now. They would have taken everything, including you. She turned and faced him, tears sliding down her face, slow and silent in the weightless air. And Mason didn't say anything more. He just pulled her close and held her while she cried, and for the first time since he met her, she didn't resist. Closed his eyes, listening to the faint hum of the ship and the silence outside, the kind of silence that carried pain, but also peace. When she pulled back, her voice was steadier. We have to leave this place soon. The memory is waking, and the rift won't hide us much longer. Where do we go? To the edge of the null moons. There's an old outpost run by a neutral AI. It's old, but it owes my kind of favor if it's still remembers. So you trust Edie, trust that it hates the people who made the Seekers more than it hates meth. That's enough. For Mesh walked toward the console, her steps steadier, her back straighter, and her silver eyes burning with something new. Not fear, not sadness, not guilt, but focus. As she plotted the course, Mason took one last look into the rift outside. It was still silent, still endless. But now he understood something. Shh hadn't just hidden the memory. She had survived it, and soon the galaxy would know what that meant. The battle over the ice planet looked dead from orbit, covered in white storms and frozen mountains that reached like broken fingers into the gray clouds. Mason's ship shuddered as it entered the thick atmosphere, snow hitting the hull like tiny bullets. The engines whined low, trying to stay stable. Kyra stood behind him, steady, her silver eyes watching the surface grow closer. That's it, she said, a whisper carried through static. The outpost is under the glacier near the northern cliffs. Mason narrowed his eyes through the cockpit. The cliffs were sharp and jagged. The wind howled through them, and sensors barely worked. Not seeing an entry point because it's not above ground, she replied. You have to dive through the surface air. Kidding, right? Would I joke with your life? Fair point. Angled the ship down and pressed hard through the thick layers of snow and frost. Then suddenly, without warning, the storm cleared for half a second, and there it was, a hole in the ice barely big enough for the ship, the shape perfect, round, like something had melted it long ago and kept it warm ever since. Mason didn't hesitate. He pulled the thrusters and dropped them. In the moment they crossed the threshold, the storm was gone behind them, and silence returned, pure cold silence. Inside the glacier, a tunnel of smooth ice walls curved inward, glowing with faint blue light, and down at the bottom a structure waited. It looked like a temple made of metal and memory, ancient and pulsing with old power. Kyra stepped forward as if pulled by something deeper than thought. This place knew me before I knew myself, she said. It remembers. They landed near the edge and exited the ship. The ground was solid but hummed beneath their feet. Mason stayed alert, his weapon ready, but Kyra walked ahead slowly, hands at her sides, no fear in her steps. The doors to the temple opened without sound, and warm light spilled out inside. They were greeted not by people but by a voice, old, mechanical, female. Not unfriendly, but not warm either. Designation recognized. Welcome. Vessel Kyra, your blood grants you access. Your companion is temporary. Proceed with caution. Mason raised an eyebrow. Temporary, her Kyra said. She's always dramatic, voice replied sharply. I am always accurate. Kyra stepped forward toward the inner chamber. Mason followed, watching the walls lined with mirrors that showed not reflections, but memories, old battles, whispers of screams, names written in light. Then the ground shook. Mason Turn fast. What was that? I answered. Intrusion detected. Proximity alert. Seekers approaching from low orbit. Time to contact estimated for minutes. Mason cursed. How did they find us? Blood trail, Kyra said quietly. I'm still linked to them. If I don't shut it off, they'll follow me for Verkan. You shut it off now. Only from the core room, she replied. But once I do, the connection will break forever, and they'll know they lost. Method means they'll strike hard. Mason looked at her and saw no fear in her now, only resolve. Then let's make sure you reach that room. They ran deeper through the winding halls, glowing with shifting memory symbols. The temple seemed to move with them, guiding their steps as if the place was alive and rooting for them. Behind them, the outer walls boomed as something slammed against the ice surface above and through one of the mirror walls. Mason saw it, a seeker ship cutting through the glacier like a serpent made of knives. We've got minutes, Mason shouted. Go, Kyra said. You hold them. I finished. Thish didn't like it, but he nodded and turned down the hall, locking the security bulkhead behind her, then ran back to the outer chamber where the first breach was already forming. Metal tore through, ice like claws through skin, and a figure stepped through, tall, dark, faceless, more shadow than body. A seeker hunter. It moved without sound, scanning every breath, every particle. Mason took aim and fired plasma bolts into its side. The thing flinched, but didn't fall. It turned toward him and came fast. Mason dodged behind cover, firing again and again, drawing its attention away from Kyra's path. Inside the core, Kyra stood before a pulsing sphere of crystal, her veins glowing as she reached out both hands, the air thick with heat and cold. All at once she felt her past, her mother, her sister, all the voices inside her waking, calling. We are one, we are many, we are you, she screamed, and light burst from her body, entering the sphere, and the temple shook hard above. Mason barely held on as a wave of light exploded outward, blinding the seeker and forcing it to retreat in silence. Again, Kyra walked back out, her skin steaming, her eyes brighter than before, and when Mason looked at her, he knew it was done. Trail is gone, she said softly. They can't find me now. Voice spoke again. Connection severed, memory locked, vessel stabilized. Farewell, child. Mason smiled and nodded. You did it. No, she whispered. We did, but both of them knew this wasn't the end. The seekers would adapt, and now that they had failed, they would return with fury. But Mason didn't care. He would be ready. Her choice this time. Thighs. Temple faded behind them, shrinking into the storm as Mason's ship lifted off again into open sky. The clouds roared like angry beasts, but Mason barely noticed. His hands were tight on the controls, eyes fixed forward, jaw clenched. The battle was over, but his heart hadn't slowed down. He could still hear the way the seeker shrieked when Kyra severed the link, could still feel the echo of her scream when she gave herself to the core. She sat quietly behind him now, wrapped in a gray blanket, knees drawn close, watching the frozen world disappear through the back window. Her face was calm, almost a calm, but Mason knew that kind of silence. It was the silence after a storm, the kind that hid everything until it exploded again. He checked the nav screen. There's a small moon nearby, he said without turning. Unclaimed space. We can hide there for a few days. Let things cool down. No answer. He glanced over his shoulder. Kyra, she blinked once. You said you wouldn't let me drown. I meant it. I think I did drown, Mason. Back there, in the core, when I touched that memory, it swallowed me. I saw them all. The voices, the lives, my sister, my mother, even the ones I never knew. I remember everything now. He swallowed hard, watching her carefully. Are you still you? She gave a small smile. Enough to answer that question, I guess. He set the ship into auto-orbit and walked back to her. You need rest. No. I need to make a choice. Her voice had weight now, not like a scared girl, not even like a survivor. It sounded like someone who had been reborn inside fire. I always ran, she said softly. When they hunted me, when my world burned, when my sister tried to hand me over, I ran. Even when you saved me, I still thought about running. I thought, one day you'd change your mind and leave me. Everyone does. I won't. She nodded slowly. I know that now. That's why I have to make this choice, not for survival, but because I want to. Mason knelt beside her. What are you choosing? She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, there was no fear in her eyes, only something deeper, something real. You, she whispered. The word landed like thunder in the quiet cabin. I want to stay, she said. Not because I need protection, not because I'm lost or hunted, but because when you looked at me in that rubble and didn't walk away, I knew. I saw a world in your eyes that was worth breathing for. Mason's chest tightened. He reached for her hand, held it gently between his own. Kyra, I'm not a weapon, she said. Not just memory, not just blood. I'm a person. I want to live like one. He smiled. Then stay. We'll find a place. Quiet, safe. She shook her head. There's no safety, not for people like me. Not yet. The seekers lost my trail. Yes, but they'll never stop guessing. And there are others. Governments, traitors, scientists. They'll hear rumors. They'll come. I can't disappear forever. But I can choose who I face them with. You think I'll be enough to stop all that? No, she said. I think we'll be enough. Mason stood and walked to the front console. There's an abandoned human listening post on the edge of the red drift, no longer monitored. Plenty of resources and a good vantage point. Kyra stood and came beside him. Then that's our next home. As Mason started the ship's engines, she touched the glass of the cockpit window. Looking out at the stars, you know what's strange? What? I don't hear the voices anymore. Not screaming, not whispering. They're quiet now. Like they trust me, like they're resting. Maybe they know you finally found someone who listens. She turned and rested her head on his shoulder. When I was in the cage, when I thought I'd die in that alley, I prayed someone would hear me. Not save me, just hear me. You did. Mason looked at her, and in that moment, he didn't see an alien or a vessel or a weapon. He saw a soul, a girl who had clawed her way through fire and grief, and chose to keep going. He reached over and started the warp sequence. Ready, she nodded. Take me with you, human. He smiled, always. And as the stars bent around them and the ship vanished into the next sky, two hearts beat in sync, one carrying memory, one carrying hope, and both finally moving towards something neither had dared believe in for a very long time, a future. She called Earth her home. The sun over Earth looked different than Kyra remembered. From the old memory, echoes passed down in her blood, warmer, gentler, almost shy. Mason's ship descended through a clean blue sky scattered with white clouds, the kind that seemed painted by hand. The world beneath them wasn't burning. There were no sirens, no soldiers, just forests, mountains, cities, lakes, and people living. Kyra stood at the front window of the ship, arms folded loosely over her chest, her eyes quietly watching as the planet grew closer. She had traveled through fire, ice, and silence. She had run from monsters and stared down the weight of 1,000 lives screaming in her head. But now there was only peace, and a strange heaviness in her chest she couldn't name. Mason stood beside her, hands relaxed for once, voice calm. Welcome to Earth. She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, it's more beautiful than the stories said. You'll like the spot we're heading to, off-grid, quiet. A friend of mine owed me a favor. He's letting us use his cabin near the sea. She glanced at him. You always have someone who owes you. He smirked. I try to be useful. The ship landed gently near a stretch of green hills overlooking the ocean. Mason opened the ramp, and warm air filled the interior, a breeze touched with salt and spring flowers. Kyra stepped out slowly, bare feet pressing into soft grass. She took a deep breath and let the wind run through her silver hair. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was trespassing on someone else's world. Mason watched her as she tilted her head toward the sky and closed her eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They spent the next few days living like ghosts in paradise. No alarms, no chases. Mason fixed the fence around the cabin. Kyra planted small glowing flowers from her home world in the soil near the porch. At night, they sat under the stars, and sometimes she sang in the old tongue soft melodies that made even the wind pause to listen. But peace doesn't mean the past disappears. One morning, Kyra stood before the mirror, brushing her hair. She saw her reflection, not the bruises, not the marks, but the person she had become, and in her eyes, she saw someone new, someone free. She turned to Mason, who was sipping coffee near the window. I want to tell them. He looked up. Tell who? Your people. The truth. About what I carry. What they did to us. What they tried to bury. Mason stood and set the cup down. That could expose you. She nodded. I know. but maybe. It's time. Maybe if they know, they'll stop pretending we were just accidents. He looked at her for a long moment. If you speak, you won't be safe anymore. I'm not doing it for safety, she said. I'm doing it because I'm finally not afraid. He stepped forward and took her hand. Then I'll stand with you, whatever happens. That afternoon, they flew to a neutral broadcast station in Orbitan. Old human relay tower no longer used for war. The technician inside, an older woman named Reyes, owed Mason from years ago. When Kyra stepped in and told her what she wanted to do, Reyes just nodded. You get 5 minutes of open broadcast. After that, people will be listening. That's all I need, Kyra said. She stood in front of the camera, no makeup, no armor, no script, just her voice. She spoke of her people, of memory passed through blood, of betrayal and fire and survival. She spoke of being hunted, of being left behind, of crying in the rubble with no hope left until a human picked her up instead of walking away. She ended with 6 words spoken slowly, clearly, powerfully. This world. I now call home. Reyes turned off the broadcast. It's done, Mason said. No, Kyra whispered. It's just started. The message spread like wildfire, not across governments, but through people. Families, veterans, survivors, humans, who had lost someone and felt something stir in her words. They didn't care about her species. They cared about the courage, the pain, the choice to stay and not run. A week later, a letter arrived from Earth's Council. It didn't threaten. It didn't demand. It said only, you have a place here. Speak freely. Kyra stood on the edge of the ocean that night, waves crashing softly at her feet. Mason walked up behind her, silent. She leaned back against him and whispered, they didn't send soldiers. No, he said. They sent welcome. She took his hand, held it tightly, and finally, fully breathed. I'm not just surviving anymore, she said. I'm living, and above them the stars Kyra once feared began to look less like hunters and more like home. The end.